lunch in here at a very early hour, so we have a time constraint. So I'm Ellen Brzozowski. I'm the Executive Director of New Canaan Cares. There is some information about New Canaan Cares on the table. We do have one more upcoming program in the end of February. It's for preschool and early elementary school parents, and it's based on the book How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen. And then we're going to have a follow-up book discussion on that book in March. So just look for that. Our spring calendars will be out in the next 2 weeks or so. All right? So thank you very much for coming. I'm going to get right to it and introduce our speaker, Dr. Lauren Pote. Lauren Pote is a clinical psychologist licensed in both Connecticut and New York State. She has experience working in both inpatient and outpatient settings and has practiced in Fairfield County for over 10 years. She completed her doctoral internship and postdoctoral fellowship at the Child Guidance Center of Southern Connecticut, where she stayed on as a staff psychologist and became the clinical administrator for the agency's satellite office that served the Darien and New Canaan communities. Dr. Pote went on to work for several years as a senior clinical psychologist at the Southfield Center for Development in Darien, and currently she works in private practice in Stamford. Dr. Pote conducts psychotherapy and assessments with children, adolescents, and adults, and she has done community presentations on a variety of topics related to parenting and child development. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Pote.
Good morning. Is everyone hearing me okay with this? Okay. So I'm going to be talking about friendship matters today. I'm going to go over some principles related to friendship and then have some time at the end where I can take some questions. So I want you just, as we begin, to just think about friendships that you've had in your lifetime. Thinking about when in your life different people have come in and become friends, what the settings and the situations were where you met people. Because each of these people has had an impact in your life in some way. Some of these friends that you've made in childhood might be people that you're still friends with today. And then I'm sure you can also think of friendships that have sort of come and gone over the years for various reasons. And just as people that you've been friends with have had impacts on your life in terms of how you see yourself, how you see other people and understand the world, you've had an impact on those people as well, in just the same fashion. So when we think of different kinds of friendships, people that we become friends with, they introduce us to different ways of thinking. They might introduce us to different activities. And by the same token, we might also sort of bring other people new experiences, new opportunities for new activities that help shape who they become as they enter adulthood. So when you think about the people in your life who had some kind of a significant role to play in who you are or where you are today, when we think of our children, it's easy to understand how important friendship really becomes. So obviously as parents, we want to help our kids to have a successful experience with friendships. We want to protect them from things that are more painful in friendships, especially if we've experienced pain in our own friendships in the past. What I'm going to talk about today is what aspects, both good and bad, are pretty normal and expected for various stages of development, and how just the hard experiences are just as important as the good experiences when it comes to friendship. So why is friendship important? So friendship has a lot of different sort of impacts and roles to play, I would say, in terms of our species, and actually other species too. So in terms of evolution, friendship plays an important role. We're kind of instinctively social beings. And in that regard, in terms of how it is important for survival, being part of a group helps us to share resources. It helps with protection. When you think of like the hunter-gatherer kinds of groups, we need people to watch our young while we're out collecting food. So that's been a key component to our survival as a species over the years.
Testing.
Hold it closer.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. In terms of physical health, there have been multiple studies that look at the number of friendships or social connectedness of people in terms differences. So there have been some studies that have looked, the majority of which are with adults, but some studies that look at just longevity in terms of the number of social connections, or how isolated versus how socially connected a person is. There have been relationships found between friendships and heart health for people who have gone through cancer treatment in terms of survival rates. There have been connections found between how connected patients are to a social network of some form. And in terms of why that has a benefit for physical health, some theories suggest that it just has, not just, but one component is that it has to do with stress levels, that when we're feeling connected and supported, our stress levels are lower, and a lower stress level can have benefits on our physical well-being. But also there's some thought that having more social connectedness also helps connect people to health resources, whether it's through people conveying care and concern and encouraging a person to seek medical help if they're beginning to experience trouble, or it's providing them sort of peripheral support when they're going through some kind of medical care. In terms of emotional health, friendship is important in terms of helping us to develop social skills. In terms of emotion regulation, it's important in terms of learning how to problem solve. Interactions with other people and sharing of ideas and having to learn how to negotiate becomes an important skill that we can use in a lot of different aspects of our life as we move through childhood and into adulthood. And then lastly, mental health. So having friendships, even if it's only a few friendships, has been found to have there's been a relationship found between having friendships and rates of depression and anxiety. Studies that looked at perceived social isolation have found a relationship with a greater sense of threat for people who have fewer friendships. So the more isolated they feel, the more they feel there's a threat of being bullied, even if they've never been bullied before. But if you think about feeling like there's a higher risk of something negative in your environment, that's going to increase your anxiety level. And if you're feeling like there aren't people that you can connect with to get support or protection, that can increase your sense of helplessness, which can correspond to increased symptoms of depression over time. And friendship supports self-esteem. So if you're spending time with a person who seems to be enjoying themselves with you and you feel good when you're with them, it can be very validating to see that there's another person who shares the same interests as you, and also it helps you to see the value that you have in another person's eyes. So you feel like you're an important person in their eyes just as they're important to you. So what is a friend? So a friend, the basic definition, is a person attached to another by feelings of affection or personal regard. And there are some key aspects in friendship. So one is pretty basic, having fun together and developing trust in another person. And in terms of social skills, we develop communication skills in our friendships and our interactions with peers. We learn how to compromise, we learn how to share, take turns, we learn nonverbal skills, eye contact, facial expressions, tone of voice, taking turns in conversations, so having that reciprocal back and forth with another person. And we're also learning problem-solving skills not just when we have to resolve a conflict, but when you think about when you watch kids working together on something, they have to strategize together. Sometimes, if it's not a structured game that's already been set up for them, when they're just trying to figure out how to play together in a more imaginative way, they're problem solving. So it's also important for intellectual development. In terms of emotional self-control, so emotional self-control or emotion regulation, this involves being able to identify the emotion that you're experiencing and then the urges or impulses that accompany it. But then to go a step further, it's not just being aware of that, but then also being able to employ some kind of problem-solving strategy so that you're not acting on impulses all the time. And lastly, empathy and perspective taking. This is a very important component to friendships. So empathy is being able to understand the emotional experience that another person is having, And in order to do that, we have to be able to sort of put ourselves in their shoes. Some people will talk about sort of mind reading skills, and so you're not really knowing with 100% certainty what's going on in another person's mind, but if you're able to reflect on your own experience and have an understanding of the connection between what I'm feeling and what's going on around me and what I'm thinking about what's going on around me, it's going to help me to understand with greater certainty what another person is likely to be thinking in reaction to a particular situation. And that's an important skill to have in terms of being able to know when to apologize, when to forgive a person, when to communicate when you like something or don't like something, when you feel like it might be important to help another person out, show some kind of care or comfort. If we don't have a clear sense of what another person might be thinking in a situation, it's not going to be as obvious to us what might be the right or the most effective way to respond. So what are some elements in forming friendship? So openness really is showing another person that you're interested in interacting with them. So this is very basic. This is making eye contact with them, smiling, listening when they're talking, nodding along as they're talking so that you're demonstrating that you're following them, responding in a relevant way. And then similarity. So typically friendships do, at least at the beginning, usually form out of some sort of shared connection that we might have with another person. So this might be a shared interest, it might be a similar background, it might be something as simple as we're neighbors, we're in the same class, we go to the same pool, we're in the same club, we're on the same sports team, but typically there's some kind of relationship that we have with the other person, something that connects us beyond who we are, because we really don't know each other yet, but it sort of sets the stage to begin to become better acquainted. And then shared enjoyment. So friendship, we have fun with the person that we're with. So this is, we don't necessarily go into it looking for having fun or planning to have fun, but we become closer or feel closer to a person when we're enjoying ourselves and we can see that they're enjoying themselves too. So we're sharing in that experience as well. So friendship really looks different at different developmental stages. So if you think about how old your children are now and when they were infants and toddlers, I'm sure that you can see lots of ways that they've grown in the way that they interact with their peers. So Robert Selman developed a 5-factor model of friendship. And so the level 0 is called the momentary playmate phase. So this lasts from 3 to 6 years. And so friendship is really centered around playtime. Children tend to, they might have preferences for certain kids, but really the focus tends to be mostly on enjoying being with children who are playing with me and we're having fun playing. There's sort of, at this age, when you think about cognitive development, they're still really developing those perspective-taking skills, so it's not necessarily so much that they're thinking about what the other child is thinking and feeling in a particular moment. It's really more concrete and focused on what we're doing together. At level 1, there's one-way assistance. So this is sort of developing sort of a step further. So there's more focus or awareness of the other child. But again, friendship is still related to the play and the experience of what this child does for me. So I have fun with this kid because we do X, Y, and Z together, or this child does this for me. Kids are not necessarily as tuned into sort of what they're contributing to the relationship in the same manner. There's not necessarily the same sort of sense that I need to reciprocate what I'm receiving. And as I go through this, I just want to also point out, you're going to see there's overlap in the years. And that's because development really does exist on a continuum, and so there are some children who are progressing faster through some of these phases than other kids, but I think the most important thing to recognize is those variations in where kids are at are actually pretty normal. It can also, I mean, even though it's normal, it can sometimes create some bumps in the road because you might have one child at a particular age who's a bit further along
in the process of developing these skills than another child, and so they may have a harder time sort of seeing each other's point of view at various points or resolving conflicts. But for the adults around, being aware of sort of what's normative and what might exist outside of that realm can be useful in deciding how you want to help children along. So at level 2, it's called a two-way fair weather cooperation. So now there is more of a sense of reciprocity. So if I do something nice for my friend, I'm kind of expecting that my friend is going to do something nice for me back in some fashion. This sense of reciprocity is a little bit rigid though at this age, so there's a sense of fairness, following the rules is very important for kids at this age. You may also start to see a little bit of kind of possessiveness between friends. So you know, if Susie's my friend, she's my friend. It might be a little bit harder for me to be okay with Susie playing with other friends. And at level 3, so this lasts from 8 to 15 years. This is a very broad range. So you're going to see a lot of variation in this phase. So kids are getting into more intimate and mutually shared relationships. So that involves having a greater sense of care and kind of more emotional closeness with my friend. It's really not so much about what they do as much as who they are, whether we have similar points of view, and certainly, you know, obviously still having fun together and enjoying ourselves is an important component throughout all of these different phases of development. This is also a period of time where you're going to often see a best friend emerge, and again, there might be that similar kind of possessiveness where kids want to spend a lot of their time with that best friend, but also might experience some jealousy if that best friend wants to spend time with other children. So it's less rigid than the level 2, but that flexibility in thinking is still sort of in progress. We really haven't achieved that fully developed sense of being able to be flexible and have trust that just because somebody might want to play with somebody else doesn't put my relationship with that person in jeopardy. Also, during that level 2 phase, you might start to see sort of elements of some cliquey behavior. So you might see children, you know, talking about who's part of my group and who's not, and what are the rules for being in this group. But during that level 2 phase, cliquey kinds of behavior are kind of relatively unsophisticated, and so they tend not to really last a long time. You'll still see that kids will, sort of that friend group will sort of morph over time. And then the last phase is level 4. So this is from age 12 on up into adulthood, and so this is considered mature friendship. So this is obviously the most mature level of interacting and having friend relationships. So there is that sense of emotional closeness with my friends, and that emotional closeness becomes very important to me. There's much more flexibility in terms of similarities and differences. We can really appreciate the differences that we might have with our friends just as much as our similarities, and really see how those differences enhance the relationship. And there's also that sense of permanence in relationships where we can be apart and still remain close. So we go to college, or we move away to different towns, but we stay in touch, or when we do reconnect, even if it's been weeks, months, we kind of pick up where we left off. And we have that sense of trust when we're apart again, that will continue. So, before I get into how parents can foster friendships, I just wanted to say a word about that 5-factor model. There is some criticism of it because it starts at age 3, and we know that from 0 to 3, infants and toddlers are demonstrating social behaviors. They demonstrate interest in other people. Some studies have even indicated that babies as young as 6 months can get excited when they see another baby. Children 12 to 18 months in those toddler years, they'll play reciprocal games with their peers, obviously. You'll see children engaging in imaginative play with one another and working together, not necessarily in sort of a parallel way where I'm playing with this toy and you're playing with that toy next to me, but we're cooperating. They show preferences for other children. They show care. You think about young children, if they see one of their peers crying, they might go over and give them a hug, so they're demonstrating empathy. They might bring them a toy, try to comfort them. They're demonstrating the ability to take turns and thinking of a friend, even in that friend's absence. So it's not, when we think about that momentary playdate or playmate idea of really the relationship is based on play, it is still really important, but I think it's also important to keep in mind that it doesn't mean there's no empathy at this age, or that prior to the age of 3, children aren't capable of that kind of thinking and mentalization. It's also important for parents to keep in mind, again, as I mentioned before, in terms of when we see a behavior that we think seems problematic, if we think about where they're at developmentally, it may help us to both recognize maybe it's actually not so unusual, that this is sort of a common task of their developmental stage. It might be related to their cognitive development in terms of that trajectory of empathy and being able to consider another person's point of view. So it both can help us maybe not get overly concerned about what we're seeing, but also it's not to dismiss it. It's not to say, well, that's natural, I'm just going to let it go, but it's going to help us to decide how we're going to respond to it. Is this a situation where we just need to help a child through some guidance and discussion understand what another person might be feeling, or how to respond to certain situations in a more pro-social way. So in terms of other ways that parents can foster friendships, modeling is very important. So kids are watching everything we do. So the way that we interact with other people, kids are watching, they're learning that way. If you ever think of a young child when they're playing like on a telephone, although these days they might be using like an iPhone, but you'll hear them, the way they hold the phone and their tone of voice, and you can see elements of maybe the ways that you're talking. So they're picking up on all these behavioral cues. But then in your direct interaction with your children, when you play with them, you're teaching them how to take turns, you're teaching them how to be a good sport, whether it comes to being a good winner or being a good loser, how to support or encourage teammates. If I lose, being able to say good game to the other kid that I was playing with, how to handle the disappointment, and a lot of verbalizing about what's going on. So when we talk about making reflective statements, this is, you're basically commenting on what you see going on with your child and trying to help them make the connections between what just happened, what they're doing, and what you think it looks like the emotion is for them. So when, something goes wrong and a child throws down a toy and stomps off, being able to say, wow, you were really frustrated when that happened. And then talk about maybe why you think they were frustrated. I looked like you were really hoping it was going to go in this direction and it didn't. Looks like you were really disappointed when that happened and it made you feel really angry. Being able to reflect on that for the child, we talk about them as reflective statements because it's like holding up a mirror and saying, here, look at what I'm seeing. Do you see it too? You're helping to organize that child's experience. And maybe the next time or down the road, if you're doing enough of that kind of reflective talk, the next time they get frustrated, maybe they don't throw the toy down. Maybe they say, I'm so frustrated, I'm so mad, because I really wanted the game to go this way and it didn't. So now they've put words to the experience. If they can put words to it, they're not reacting impulsively. And that sets the stage now for being able to talk about what we do now. So it's understandable that you're feeling angry, so that's validating. You're not necessarily saying you should be angry, but you're saying, I can understand, based on your point of view, why you feel that way. And now that we both understand that, let's talk about how we feel better. What can we do to solve the situation? If it's with another child, what do we do to repair what just happened so that the two of you can move on and begin playing again and having fun? When we're modeling that with our children or are practicing that with them, again, the hope is that when they are apart from us and they're with their peers, they're going to employ similar strategies with them that are going to help foster more effective interactions and support more stable friendships. So I just touched on this a bit, communication about mental states. So again, making those connections between feelings, the situation, thoughts that you might have about the situation, why that's connected to how you're feeling, and then what you're going to do about it. And you can do this not even just in what's going on with the child, but when you think about, if you're watching a show, why do you think the character said that in that situation? Or how do you think they felt when this happened? What do you think is going to happen next? Or if you're watching something and maybe a character got into some sort of a conflict or difficult situation, talking about, how did they solve it? Why do you think they chose that? Then relating it to experiences that your child has. Again, it's just practice in really being able to think about what we're feeling and think about why we're doing what we're doing. Because if we can create just enough space to take a few seconds to think about that, that is time when we're not acting on impulse. We might become aware of an impulse, but now we have a choice. We have the opportunity to choose. Am I going to act on it, or am I going to do something else? Because I can think ahead a little bit now about what's going to happen if I act on it, and what's going to happen if I do something different. So in terms of parenting style, there's research that suggests our parenting style plays an important role in how children approach friendships, because their first relationships are with us. So research suggests that an authoritarian style tends to be the sort of more challenging style. So that's where there's a high degree of behavioral control, but not a lot of warmth. An authoritative style is a style where there is a high degree of control, but there's also emotional warmth in the relationship. So what that means basically is with an authoritarian styles, the way that behavioral control is achieved is more through the threat of punishment or actual punishment. So do as I say because I say so. There's not a lot of discussion about why. And if you don't do it, this is what happens. I'm going to take this away. And so a child might follow that direction, but they might not really understand why am I doing it this way, beyond mom or dad said so. When you think about friendships, we do want to have a sense of control over what's going on. Not necessarily we have to control the other person, but we also don't want to feel like we have no control. And so if you think of like children saying, we're going to do it this way or else I won't be your friend. It's a similar idea. So it's sort of a moment where they don't really know what else to do. So threatening to take away the friendship might be the way that they're encouraging or influencing somebody to do things their way. That works sometimes, but it tends to be pretty short-lived. And obviously, if I'm in a friendship where somebody's threatening not to be my friend every time we have a difference of opinion, eventually I might get tired of being friends with that person because eventually I'm anticipating eventually this friendship's going to end. I've been threatened with the loss of this friendship enough. However, conversely, I guess, if I have a friendship where a person's able to explain to me why they want things their way, and I can explain to them why I want things my way, then we can compromise and find sort of that middle ground. So with authoritative parenting, the emotional warmth side is explaining to a child, I can understand that you don't like that I'm telling you to stop playing and go brush your teeth right now. I understand that you're really excited or you're having a lot of fun. If we don't go and brush teeth right now, though, we're going to be late for school. And when you're late for school, you feel really stressed out. And you're going to miss all the fun stuff going on there. So at this time, this is when we stop playing and we go and brush our teeth. So we're not threatening to punish in that moment. Obviously, there are consequences when rules are broken or when a child misbehaves, but the goal is to help a child understand the relationship between the behavior and the consequence and why, in what way the rule or the direction was disobeyed versus punishment for the sake of just making a child feel bad because they didn't do things the way they were supposed to. And opportunities to form connections, obviously, is an important way that parents can help foster relationships. So the more opportunities kids have to interact with each other, the more chances they have to make friends. So whether it's playgroups or sports teams or dance classes or art classes or clubs or going to a playground, things related to school and things outside of school, these are all settings where your child obviously is going to have a chance to connect with other children and find people that they enjoy being around and people who enjoy being with them. So preparing for playdates. This is particularly, I'd say, important with new friends. And I think when children are on the younger end, they're just getting into having play dates. And so if you think about the level of involvement parents have in play dates when they're young, there's a lot of involvement. And then over time, with a lot of things in our child's lives, we start to take a step back and let them do more on their own as we see that they're able to handle those increasing degrees of independence. Thinking about who your child is too. If they're on the shy side, if they're new to a community, it might be important to plan ahead for a play date in terms of what your child has in mind for what they want to do, what they're expecting the play date to be like. Particularly when kids are younger and that flexibility of thinking is really not established yet, not even just with play dates, with anything. When a child expects things to go a certain way and they don't, that can be hard for them at first to handle. So if we're able to plan ahead as much as is reasonable, we can't predict with 100% certainty what's going to happen. But if we have some sense, or a child has some sense of what to expect and what to do if things don't go according to plan, then again, it gives that sense of things are still under control, even if they don't go exactly the way I expect them to go. So things like thinking about what they might want to do. What does it mean to be a good host? It's an important skill for kids to develop when they're having a child and a friend over to play. So really basic things like when we have a guest, we let them choose first what they're going to do. So even if you have some ideas in mind of what you want to do, let's make sure that you're also listening to see what your friend wants to do. Or if there's some concern about what the child's going to want to do or whether they're going to have fun, coming up with a few options. What if my friend comes over and they don't know what they want to do? That's fine. But if I already thought about one or two things that we could do, I can say, we can do this or we can do this, and then you let your friend choose. Things like talking about getting angry and frustrated, or what to do if conflict erupts between you and your friend. It doesn't mean that the play date's not going well, but if I know how to handle it going into it, or I know that, if I'm focusing on the idea of I'm trying to make this, as enjoyable for my guest as possible, maybe I can let certain things go that other times, like when I'm playing with my little brother or my little sister, I don't let go so easily. So that's preparing for the play date. So we talked about planning ahead. So then during the play date, obviously in terms of how much supervision kids need, it really, again, depends on age and what you know about your child, what you know about the child that's coming over, or children. So when they're younger, parents tend to supervise more just to make sure that they're safe. And I would say the level of supervision is it should always start with, well, what's a safe degree of distance? As they get older, you may be in a different room where they might be in earshot or eye shot, but you're not sitting on the floor with them or right there in the wings, ready to jump in. But really the purpose is obviously safety, but it's to listen in for any signs of trouble. And it doesn't mean that you have to respond and intervene directly all the time, but it's just kind of listening for, how is whatever the situation at hand being handled. And if you are starting to hear like things are getting a little bit more heated, or your child and their friend are trying to work things out and it just doesn't seem to be working, that might be a good opportunity to come in and offer like a snack. Maybe we're going to take a little break from whatever we're doing here, because it might actually be they're getting tired, they're getting kind of hungry, and they're getting a little cranky. But it also just creates a break from the intensity of whatever was just happening and gives everybody an opportunity to cool off a little bit. What I tell kids all the time is when we're more stressed out or heated, the more intense the emotion, it's just harder to think clearly. And if we can't think clearly, we can't use our problem-solving skills to the best of their ability. So if I disengage from whatever that situation is for a period of time, take a break, cool off, get a snack, I might forget about it. Suddenly what seemed really important to me may not seem as important to me anymore, and maybe I can let it go. Or maybe we just think of, we want to play something else now. Maybe we actually more consciously decide, like, that wasn't really fun anymore, let's do something new. And then they can move on. So then after the play date, It's also a good idea to kind of process with your child how it went. Did they have fun? Did they feel like their friend had fun? How could you tell your friend was having fun? If anything seemed to happen that was a bit more difficult, asking your child kind of what that was like for them, or what was their understanding of what went on. And it's not to tell your child like what they did right or not to tell them what they did wrong. It's actually a good idea to tell them what they did right, things that they did well. I really like the way that you were sharing and taking turns, excuse me, with your friend. Or when they took that toy from you and I could tell you weren't done with it, you handled it really well. You used your words and you stayed calm. That was really good. You want to really give attention to those positives and give some praise to it because you're reinforcing them. So you're increasing the chances that your child's going to engage in those behaviors again in the future. If there is anything that you feel needs correction, I always recommend kind of sandwiching a correction between two compliments. So you did this really well. I could see that this was harder for you, and maybe a different way of handling it next time would be this. And then here's another thing that you did really well. And part of that is you want to, a child, if you think about yourself, when someone's giving you feedback, you probably would like to hear more positive than negative. You want to feel like you are doing some things right and that you're doing things well and that somebody is noticing that you're doing things well. That's validating. But it also makes it easier to hear that if there are still things that I need to work on, at least I can see that I am achieving some successes too. It's a lot harder to feel like things are going to improve if all I hear are things that I did wrong. It's going to feel like, well, I just always do things wrong, and so why am I going to even try doing things better? So I need to know that I'm doing things well. So, friendships come with challenges and obstacles. So with shyness, shyness is really different from like social anxiety. And I do think shyness is, when you think of temperament, everyone has different personality styles. Shyness is not necessarily a problem or cause for concern, but we want to make sure that if we have a child who's just a bit slower to warm up to a situation, eventually they warm up to it. So some kids, we all work at different paces. Some kids can just walk into a group of children and they may not know any of them, and they just start playing and introduce themselves and invite kids to play with them, and other kids are going to hang back and be more kind of observers and get a lay of the land first, and both of those are fine. But as kids are developing, we want to make sure that even if they feel somewhat shy, that they still have a sense of knowing what they can do to enter situations, because shy kids want friends too, obviously. It's just, it may not feel as easy for them to get into an interaction. So when you think about those key elements that I touched on before, that openness, the similarity, and the shared enjoyment. Openness is a really important area to focus on with kids who are shy. Kids who are shy might be a little bit more reserved. They may not be thinking as much about things like making eye contact with their peers, or smiling, or responding in a sort of enthusiastic way if somebody says hi to them. And it's not that they're intending to be unfriendly, but they're not thinking as much about what they look like to another person. So being able to talk really explicitly with them about that when you're interested in making friends, since people don't know what you're thinking, you have to show them with your behavior. If I walk into a room and I look at you and I smile, even if I don't feel ready to talk to you yet, I've at least communicated something non-verbally. I'm happy to see you. I'm approachable. I look friendly. I look calm. Versus someone who has kind of an angry look on their face or doesn't look at anything.
Oh. Sorry. I'll go get the cavalry.
I'll try yelling. Oh, we're back.
All right.
Got it?
I think so. So, preparing for those kinds of behaviors and practicing can be really important for a child.
And as much as you can.
Okay, I'll move on.
Prepare for social events. So, especially things that are going to be new. First day of school, going to a birthday party, going over to a friend's house. Oh, I might.
long as I can. So the more you can prepare them, the more that they know what to expect and how to handle things, the more under control things are going to feel for them. So when it comes to play dates or starting to establish friendships, it probably is a good idea to also maybe start with having kids come over to the shy child's house. When they're at home, that's where they probably feel the most at ease. It's the most predictable, and so there's more opportunity to really plan ahead for how they want it to go. Yeah. Actually, let's control that. So the other piece with shyness is thinking about organized activities to involve them in. So, are we back? Yes. Thank you. A shy child might need more structured activities as sort of the platform for making friends initially, versus kind of going out into the playground. They're on their own. So starting off with an activity where there are other kids, obviously you share that interest. Again, when you think about similarity, right off the bat, that's something that,
I think you wanted a battery.
yeah. So the friendship can start there. So without even really knowing anybody yet, I at least know that everyone else here likes the activity that I like too. And maybe, depending on what the activity is, if it's a team, we're playing together and supporting each other, or we're doing something that's fun together, even though we might not be directly interacting in terms of having a conversation yet. But that also sets the stage for future interactions where we have something to talk about now. So if I'm involved in some activity outside of school and there's a kid from my class there, and then we go to school, then we can talk about that activity together. I can talk about what I think of it, you can talk about what you think about it, and then maybe our conversation grows from there. I've gotten comfortable now with that person. I've gotten to get a sense of how they behave and if they seem friendly to me and approachable, so I might not feel as intimidated. The shyness, hopefully then, starts to subside and I feel more at ease being myself and less reserved with that person. So another obstacle might be limitations in social awareness. Sometimes that's simply a product of development. There's also, in terms of symptoms of things like attention disorders or autism spectrum disorders, having limited understanding or attention to certain social cues can be really hard for kids. So they might need more direct coaching and instruction about things like nonverbal behavior, about specific ways to enter situations, to initiate an interaction or initiate play, how to approach a group of kids if you want to join them in play, but also how to handle rejection. So if I approach a group of kids and I ask to play and they say no, I'm going to feel hurt. I might feel upset by that, but if I don't really have a clear sense of how to handle that, I might not respond in a way that's going to make it likely that maybe the next time I try, kids are going to be responsive and sort of allow me in. So really working explicitly with kids on talking about social situations, role-playing is a really important way to practice. They're practicing it with you. It's sort of under a more controlled, in a more controlled environment. The more we practice something, the more automatic it is when we try to do it later. You want them to feel like they can sort of more naturally engage in some of the behaviors that you've practiced with them. Because whenever you're learning something new, you're thinking a lot about it every step of the way. And if I'm thinking a lot about like, well, first I do this, and next I do this, I'm not really paying attention to what's happening around me, and it might be hard for me then to keep up with what's going on. So if I have a clearer sense going in, like this is usually what I can expect, then I might be able to use those strategies a little bit more naturally. But also remembering that with limited social awareness, there are going to be times where things don't go well, and so being able to talk about that with kids and sort of piece it apart with them, kind of understand, well, you know, what did you see happening? What was your understanding of the situation? Here's something else. I don't know if, you know, you might not have seen this aspect of the situation, but I wonder if this was also going on. You know, it's also helpful in terms of interpreting behaviors. When somebody does something that I don't like, I have thoughts about why they just did that, but I might be wrong. So if somebody comes in really angry looking and I think, oh, that kid doesn't like me, well, it's possible, but it could be that something completely unrelated to me happened before that I don't know about, and maybe they're just angry about something else that happened. But being able to understand that might affect then the way that I'm going to approach that child, or whether I'm going to approach them. It's going to affect how I feel about that interaction. So I want to talk a little bit about cliques. I mentioned that before, that they do start to emerge during that two-way cooperative phase, where kids start talking about who's part of their friend group and who's not. So I want to differentiate cliques from friend groups quickly. Cliques tend to be more rigid. Friend groups are pretty natural and they're flexible. So both cliques and friend groups can develop around shared interests and similarities. A clique has more explicit rules about who gets to be in the group and who's not, versus a friend group where we're friends because we like to be around each other, and there's not really a rule so much. And in a friend group, I can play with people who are not part of that group and not worry about losing my connection to the people in that original group. Whereas with a clique, there may be a greater sense that you have to be loyal to this group and you're not allowed to be with other people outside the group. If you do, you're losing your slot here. You're not with us, you're against us. So cliques obviously have the potential to be detrimental. Again, they do kind of naturally develop, but they often don't last very long. It's, I think, a product of kids trying to figure out sort of how do we define this group of peers that we have sort of formed. They become detrimental, though, obviously, when kids feel conflicted about maybe what the rules are of the group or what the group is doing, and feels pressure to conform to whatever the group is doing because they don't want to be rejected by the group, and so maybe it involves going against their own values or doing things that they know are hurtful or wrong. Maybe the rules put somebody at risk of harm. That's definitely something that we don't want with cliques. Or a child does start to feel ostracized and alone. So with cliques, it is important just to kind of keep an ear out and an eye out. If you hear kids talking about the rules, like, oh, well, these are the rules for this group and these are the rules for being out of the group, being able to I wouldn't say necessarily telling them, well, you can't do that. You think about that authoritative parenting again, really engaging your child in conversation about, what's important about that friend group, what do they think about the rules, is there a way to talk about that with the other members of the group? And I think this is probably the easiest when kids are younger. I think it feels harder as kids get older and cliques do form, and they even feel to parents to be more kind of rigid. But I still think even as kids get older, it's important to just have conversations about what they think about these groups, if they're in one or if they feel left out of one or want to be part of one, really getting into a discussion about why. Again, that those mental states are important. The feelings that they're having are driving, and what they think about the situation is going to drive the decisions they make. And ultimately, the goal is not necessarily for us to have control over whether there's a clique or not. It's to help kids make their own decisions and feel secure in the decisions that they make. I think the other important element is to, from an early age, encourage friendships in multiple areas of their life. So, just as friends at school are important, do they have friends outside of school as well? So that if there are cliques at school, they may not feel as important to a child if they know that they have friends elsewhere. It doesn't mean we're making a decision between one or the other. But if we think about cliques as being fairly temporary, if I'm feeling disappointed with the quality of my friendships right now at school, then if I know that I do still have friendships in my life, that's going to help me feel a lot better versus feeling like my only option is the kids at school and I don't really have anybody else. Now I feel very alone. That's certainly what we want to avoid. So I want to touch briefly on bullying. And actually, I'm going to advance this a little bit. I missed a couple of slides. So coping with cliques. I've talked a little bit about this. So also staying calm. Sometimes if our child comes home in distress because they're feeling rejected, we go into like mama bear or papa bear mode, and we want to protect our child. We want to really listen first before we respond to help us understand the situation so that we can reason with our child about how they want to deal with it. In terms of social dynamics and putting that rejection in perspective, this is things like reminding a child that they've gotten angry at family members before and rejected them before, but it doesn't last typically. These things do, most of the time they blow over. Obviously there are situations that are a bit more long-lasting, and then we get into talking about how to deal with those situations. I talked about fostering out-of-school friendships, respecting their need to feel accepted. So I would say, again, when you're thinking about cliques, we don't want to tell our child, well, that's a clique, you don't want to be part of that anyway, and leave it at that. You should go find other friends, because that's not really validating how that child's feeling. They need to know that you understand their point of view. So in terms of bullying, bullying and teasing are two different things. I could do a whole separate talk on bullying, but the difference between bullying and teasing, or more impulsive aggression, teasing is kind of in the moment and it's over. Impulsive aggression, similarly, it's really restricted to a particular situation, and it tends to be over. With bullying, there's usually an imbalance of power, and there's an identified target, and it's usually repeated behavior that's intended to harm someone or intimidate them or humiliate them. And they threaten, there's usually a threat of further aggression down the road. And that is definitely, bullying is really something where adults have to get involved. Whether it's talking with your child about how to respond to someone who might be targeting you in a bullying way, or witnessing bullying. But I think also beyond that, it's not just the parent talking to their child, it's really communities. So really models of anti-bullying initiatives have really looked at a community kind of response, and that there really has to be a culture developed of respect for one another and what's acceptable and what's not, and then there has to be a really consistent response when it's evident that there is bullying behavior going on. When it comes to teasing, we have to also talk to kids about how to handle that, or if we know our child is the one doing the teasing. Again, we use that kind of discussion where we're talking about mental states and how our behavior is affecting another person, and also how we're feeling in the moment when we're engaging in that kind of behavior. So internet and social media is one that is tricky, because I think in this day and age, socializing is happening a lot more on electronic media. Especially as kids enter the preteen and teen years, they are engaging in communication with offline friends, meaning friends that they know from school or the community, a lot outside. When they come home and they're texting or FaceTiming or using social media, people also make friends online. And I think you'll hear sort of pros and cons of that. People will say, well, I feel really socially anxious, but I've been able to make friends online and it feels a bit more manageable. I think ultimately, the goal is to find some balance. It's not that making friends online is in and of itself bad, but we want to make sure kids are safe, because we also know there are a lot of risks in the internet. We also don't want all of their friendships to exclusively be online, because then they become socially isolated from the people around them. And we don't want them developing the sense that the only way I can be socially successful is in a virtual world, whereas I can't handle face-to-face interaction. When you think about not just friendships, but just socializing, you need a balance. If I spend all of my time in front of a screen, I'm not learning how to read social cues and nonverbal behavior. I'm also not learning how to employ that myself. So these are very important basic skills, not just for friendship, but for interacting with anybody in society, for having a job, for navigating the adult world as we get older. So when you dislike or disapprove of your child's friend, forbidding the friendship tends not to work for a few reasons. If I say you can't play with so-and-so anymore, I don't like the way they behave, they might share that with somebody, and then there's hurt feelings that can emerge. It can be invalidating for your child if they really like this friend. They might interpret that on some level as there's something you don't like about me then too. because I have a sense of similarity with this kid. In some situations, kids might feel like I don't have other options. So this kid is friends with me, and yeah, it's hard being friends with them, but if I'm not friends with this kid, I don't have anybody else. So instead of forbidding a friendship, I would say getting to know that friend better is important, both in terms of your direct interactions with that friend, but also understanding from your child, why is that friendship important to them? What do they like about that friend? What do they do together that's fun? Because maybe whatever the behavior is that you've been seeing might take on a different meaning if you have a better sense of who that kid is. Being clear about rules. If the things that might be hard about a certain friend have to do with the way they behave when they come over, it's fine to talk at the outset about, these are the rules in our house. I know every home has different rules. These are the rules at our house. So we don't climb on the furniture at our house, or if you want a snack from the fridge, just ask me first. Making sure that your child understands which rules really have to be upheld when we have a friend over. We know that things can get more kind of fluid, and some things might be a little less consistent with regards to certain family rules, but the ones that are most important, it's just important. It's good to plan that out ahead of time and how to convey that to the friend. Talking non-judgmentally about the friendship. Again, if I'm having a hard time with a particular friend, that's my point of view. I want my child to be able to feel like it's okay to share their point of view about this. If I'm saying this is a bad person, I've already made up my mind about them, and so my child might not feel like it's as easy to talk to me about why they feel like it's actually not such a bad friendship and why they like this person. We want kids to feel comfortable coming to us with good things and hard things. But if they feel like our response is going to be more judgmental and not open to hearing their point of view, they're going to be less likely as they get older to come to us to share those kinds of things. Thinking about whether there are other friendships, as I said, if they feel like they really don't have any other choices, then we want to help them feel like they do have other opportunities. So maybe it's not so much about this friend, but it's just casting a wider net so that they feel like they have lots of options. And remembering for parents that not all friendships last forever. So there might be someone that my kid's friends with right now that I don't love, but they may not stay friends. Maybe whatever the behavior is I see may not bother my kid right now, but maybe down the road they start to see, like, I actually don't like that either, and I'm going to start spending more time with some of these other kids instead. Or I just might not have this friend over anymore. We're friendly at school, but we're not going to be the best of friends. So lastly, when a friendship ends. So, as I just said, friendships don't last forever. Friends they drift apart, kids move, sometimes specific things happen where friendships end over more negative feelings. If your friend, or if your child is on the receiving end of a rejection, that can be really hard because they're going to come home hurt and upset, and you want to help them through that. Thinking about their developmental stage is really important in terms of determining whether we need to really intervene or if we need to just let it play itself out. Certainly when a friendship ends and the other friend is rejecting your child, being able to empathize first is really most important. Instead of getting into, well, what do we do about it right off the bat, just being able to sit with them and understand how sad they feel, because this is an important friendship for them. Discourage retaliation. So often when we get hurt, the next feeling we feel is anger. So kids might want to get back at that kid for hurting their feelings, or gossip about them, or post something online to show how angry they are. So being able to talk with your child about validating that feeling. I understand why you want to do that. It's not okay to do that. Maybe it has to do with rules, it has to do with safety, but also helping them to understand, does it exacerbate a situation, make it worse? Think about the other kids who are witnessing this. Does it actually prevent you from having opportunities to make other friends because they see that, if they cross you, this is what happens. They might not feel as secure in approaching you then. Understanding what happened, because maybe it is a situation where things just need to cool off. Maybe it is a situation where your child did do something that upset the other friend, and you can talk about maybe how to repair the relationship. Is there an apology that needs to be made, or is there something that your child might need some help in considering forgiving? Is there something kind that they can do to show the other friend that they're still interested in trying to repair the relationship? And then figuring out if it's time to let go. So if you've gone through all of this and maybe your child has tried to repair things and it's really not going anywhere, I think it is important then to figure out with your child, when is it time to maybe stop actively doing things to rekindle the friendship? Is it maybe best to kind of let things be where they are, understanding that we don't know what the future holds? Maybe things will work out later on between the two of you. Maybe you're going to move on and you're going to establish new friendships just as they do. And that's, again, where the value of multiple friendships comes into play. So navigating the world of friendships is tough to do on our own, and so it's always important to think about who we have around us to help. So certainly other parents are important, especially during the elementary school years. I think parents tend to know their friends, their children's friends, more, and the parents of those children, because they're orchestrating play dates and they're involved in schools and different activities. But even middle school and high school, I think it is important for parents to know each other. At least that way they have some sense of what might be going on in the atmosphere that might be influencing what they see going on at home with their kids and particular friendships. If you ever have a question about what's going on at school, you're hearing from your child what they're experiencing, maybe helping you to get a context. If it's really hard to understand a situation with your child, asking the teacher what they're seeing can be helpful. If you feel like your child might need some extra support, or you just want some guidance in terms of how to handle certain things, reaching out to a school counselor. And if you've been trying to work through things with your child and it really isn't changing, or things seem to be getting worse and they're experiencing a lot of distress or challenges with peers, whether it's emotionally or behaviorally, certainly enlisting the help of a mental health professional can be important in getting some guidance as well as some direct intervention for your child. And it's always important to remember that every child is different. So as I mentioned before, we all have different personality styles and temperaments. Some of us run hot, some run cold, some are easygoing, some are more high-strung. This exists on into adulthood. So thinking about who your child is, where they're at developmentally, what do they seem to have mastered, what are they still working on, can help you figure out when either trouble erupts, how much concern do we need to have, or as they're entering new social situations, how much do we need to sort of prep them and practice with them, and how much can we kind of let them play it out and see what happens and learn through experience. And these are a couple of suggested readings. The first one is a parent manual. Fred Frankel actually developed a curriculum of friendship training for children, but this is kind of more user-friendly. And then the second one is for children ages 6 to 9. It's like a handbook for children on making friends that can also be helpful. So thank you very much. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take them.